What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. I hope everybody is doing well today. Thank you so much for joining me. Today I bring to you a highly recommended video. Thank you so much for all the recommendations, by the way. Today we'll be reacting to why so few Canadians live on Prince Edward Island. Yeah, how come a little bit of people only live on an island, man? I'm curious to know that as well. You know, I guess this video will be going into detail on why Prince Edward Island has such a little population. And I guess, you know, some of the fabulous, amazing things to do maybe on this island, some of the amazing sceneries to go and visit on this spectacular island. Go ahead and check it out, man. I'm really excited to learn more about Prince Edward Island, considering that I've only heard about it a few times, you know? Most Americans probably have never heard about a small province a day in their life, okay? Let alone actually visiting it in person. But me, I will be reacting and learning about this beautiful Canadian province today, and someday throughout my time I will be able to visit Canada and visit all these provinces we have been learning about, man. Just go experience it for myself, man. Let's go ahead and check out Canada's smallest province. Maybe that's why so little people actually live on Prince Edward Island. I mean, it is Canada's smallest province, but just because it's Canada's smallest province does not mean that it's not big at all. I mean, come on, it's still pretty big.
Prince Edward Island is Canada's smallest province by both size and population. In fact, it's considerably smaller than Vancouver Island on the west coast, which is part of British Columbia. So how did Prince Edward Island become a full province if it's so small, and why don't more Canadians live there?
Yeah.
But before we can answer either of these questions, we have to talk about the province as it exists today.
Quite comfortable to live on, okay?
Prince Edward Island holds a unique geographic position within Canada. It's fully situated within the Gulf of St. Lawrence and is the only full province that's not connected to the mainland by land. This means that, up until fairly recently, the only way to access the island was by boat. Of course, there's a bridge now, but we'll get to that later. And because it's an island, this means it has a very long coastline. In fact, its coastline stretches over 1,100 kilometers and is the most distinctive and important geographic feature in the province. That's because it's this exact coastline that makes Prince Edward Island a pretty comfortable place to live relative to its provincial neighbors.
But I mean, like, isn't that dangerous living right on the coast, though? Like, living so close to the water and everything? What about, like, tsunamis and all that? You guys get that? Like, it's gotta be dangerous living that close to the water, especially so close to the ocean, man. Don't you guys have, like, tsunamis and, like, hurricanes and stuff that affect the people living on the coast? It has to take a toll on them in their houses as well. Where do you even go shopping at? Where are the grocery stores at? If you live on a coast, you probably gotta drive out far, don't you? Prince Edward Island is small, but how far do you really have to drive to your closest local supermarket? Oh man.
Gulf of St. Lawrence is unusually warm. That's not to say you can go take a dip in it and be fine. It is still very cold to human touch. But relative to the North Atlantic, which runs up against Newfoundland and Labrador, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick, it's much warmer. In fact, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration of the United States, the southern part of the Gulf of St. Lawrence is, on average, about 5 degrees warmer than the Bay of Fundy, which is just on the other side of the Isthmus of Chignecto. And this has had a huge impact on the climate of Prince Edward Island. Because it's surrounded by the warm waters of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, the island experiences a maritime climate that's far more moderate and milder than the mainland.
Yeah.
Summers on Prince Edward Island are warm, but not too hot, with temperatures averaging around 20 degrees Celsius in July, while winters can be cold, with temperatures often dropping below freezing in January and February. That's not to say it's perfect. Prince Edward Island gets exposed to traditional maritime weather patterns as well, including strong winds, heavy precipitation, and the occasional Atlantic storm. But on average, it's much more comfortable than either New Brunswick or Nova Scotia. All that said, the island is, of course, much smaller than either of its maritime siblings. It's crescent-shaped with an area of about 5,660 square kilometers, and its highest point rises only to 142 meters above sea level, reflecting its low-lying terrain. Speaking of the terrain, the soil on Prince Edward Island is famous for its rich red color due to the high levels of iron oxide. This fertile soil has made agriculture, especially the cultivation of potatoes, one of the province's major economic activities.
So iron oxide is what makes the beaches, have that different type of color in the sand and all that type of stuff. I've seen black beaches, red beaches, pink beaches, purple beaches, brown, tan, white beaches, like with the white sand. Yeah, I've always wondered, and even the water in some different countries, the water is a different color, like literally pink. Yeah, I think it has something to do with like the chemical balance and everything, but yeah. Interesting. I've always wondered, you see how this is like reddish? I would definitely notice that because we don't have this type of, reddish, rocky terrain over here in the States.
Speaking of the terrain, the soil on Prince Edward Island is famous for its rich red color due to the high levels of iron oxide. This fertile soil has made agriculture, especially the cultivation of potatoes, one of the province's major economic activities. In fact, Prince Edward Island produces about a quarter of Canada's potatoes, despite consisting of way less than 1% of all of Canada's land. This flat and gently rolling topography, combined with this fertile soil, allowed farming to flourish over time, enabling Prince Edward Island to become one of the most important provinces in Canada in terms of food security. And despite being relatively flat with no mountains, the usual generator of rivers and water, the island is not really lacking for fresh water due to extensive
Yo, who lives here? Man, they got their own boating docks and everything. You could probably go fishing. You could probably go swimming. Look how close you are to the water. That is kind of scary though. Let's put some gates up. Hello. I'm like, why we ain't got no gates up? Wait a minute. Why nobody want to be protected from the water? They could probably swim. You would think they'll be a little more bigger considering as much land, that these homes have to themselves. This would definitely want to make me purchase some acres, build a nice mansion. You got a little lake. I would call it a private lake because it's residential. If you're in this area, nobody else is really touching this part of the lake besides the residential homeowners, the locals. I'm pretty sure there's boats that could, drive through there and, other people could come up in there, but this is like really for the people over here. Now, I can't see back this way, but it seems like it's really for the people over here who have their homes, and then it kind of expands out more. So they kind of have like their own little private lake over here. That's kind of cool if you really want to look at it that way. I mean, it's not technically a private lake for the residential, owners. That's the way I would see it as. Like, this is nice.
Groundwater of rivers and water, the island is not really lacking for fresh water due to extensive groundwater reserves. That's not to say it's limitless, but once again, the island's physical geography is not a limiting factor, as it's not only able to supply ample water for its population, but also for its extensive agricultural needs. All of this builds to the question we're trying to answer in this video. If Prince Edward Island has a more comfortable climate, ample fresh water, and was historically a prime agricultural region, then why don't more people live there today? To answer that, we have to first talk about how it became a province in the first place. Prince Edward Island's path to becoming a Canadian province, rather than part of either New Brunswick or Nova Scotia, is a unique tale of isolation, economic struggles, and political maneuvering. Unlike Vancouver Island, which ultimately became part of British Columbia, Prince Edward Island retained its distinct identity and emerged as a separate province within Canada, which is a little weird when you consider that Prince Edward Island is less than 20% of Vancouver's island area size and population. Of course, as with the United States, how the east coast of Canada developed was markedly different from how its west coast developed. Prince Edward Island's separation from the mainland, located in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, made it physically and politically distinct from other British colonies in North America. In fact, when Britain gained control of the island following the French and Indian War in 1763, it renamed it St. John's Island and had it managed by the colony of Nova Scotia. But this did not sit well with the islanders at the time, who lobbied extensively to become an independent colony of Britain. As such, in 1769, St. John's Island, the colony, was born, which would be its official name until 1798, when Great Britain changed its name to Prince Edward Island because there were simply too many St. John's named places already.
I was thinking the same thing just now. That's crazy. I'm glad we on the same page, man. I didn't want to pause to say it because I feel like everybody would be like, oh, here he go pausing again. Why you ain't had to tell us that, dude. We know. Look, man, too familiar. I'm like, we got a lot of St. John's, a lot of Saint this, a lot of Saint that, let alone John's. We are perfectly fine. We don't need no more St. John's.
Named to Prince Edward Island because there were simply too many St. John's named places already. For much of the 1800s, Prince Edward Island was largely self-governed, with a population that maintained a strong sense of independence, while other colonies such as those in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick had stronger economic and social ties to the mainland, Prince Edward Island's isolation contributed to its desire to manage its own affairs, despite consistent economic hardships. The island's economy was heavily dependent on agriculture and shipbuilding, both of which were vulnerable to global economic issues in the 1800s. While there were calls during this time for Prince Edward Island to forge closer ties with the mainland to help stave off these economic issues, the island's colonists feared that if they did that, they would ultimately lose control over their land and self-governance. This fear of being overshadowed played a key role in the island's reluctance to embrace any form of political union with its neighbors. In fact, Prince Edward Island did not initially join the Canadian Confederation in 1867 because of this exact fear. When Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick...
What? Wait. Oh, I didn't know that.
In fact, Prince Edward Island did not initially join the Canadian Confederation in 1867 because of this exact fear. When Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia formed the Dominion of Canada, Prince Edward Island's leaders instead remained skeptical of the benefits, believing they had little to gain from entering into a political union that would be dominated by larger and more populated provinces. The islanders feared that their small population would be marginalized and their unique interests overlooked. Additionally, Prince Edward Island had its own land ownership issues, as much of the island's land was still owned by absentee landlords, a legacy from British colonial times, which complicated its political relationships with its neighbors. By the early 1870s, however, Prince Edward Island found itself facing serious financial difficulties. The island had invested heavily in building a railway system to stimulate economic growth, but the cost of construction had driven the colony into debt. At the same time, its economic isolation, caused by its continued separation from the mainland, was becoming increasingly problematic. Trade and transportation between...
It would have been great too, though, because think about it. If you don't have a lot of people living on Prince Edward Island, okay, we can still have visitors. We can still have tourists come and visit, use the public transportation. Let's have a railroad system. Go from, I don't know, let's say from what? Nova Scotia, maybe Quebec, and it could go all the way to Prince Edward Island. You know, there's still ways, is what I'm trying to say, to, you know, get people over there without them, you know, having to live there and generate money for the economy over there. We need visitors, you know, travelers. We don't need locals that live here. Now, you know, if we could gather and attract a certain amount of number of people, you know, for real, monthly and annually, and we could keep the rates positive, man. What? Prince Edward Island is going to be a gold mine. They're going to make a lot of money. It's beautiful there. Now, you need places for people to stay, hotels and, you know, Airbnbs. I don't know if you guys do Airbnbs out there, but hotels and, you know, stuff like that, motels. You got to sleep somewhere. I feel like, you know, since it's a small province as well, where's your local supermarket at? I feel like everybody knows everybody on Prince Edward Island. That's how small this thing is looking. Does everybody go to the same supermarket, or are there more than one supermarket, you know? But those could generate money as well towards, you know, the economy living in Prince Edward. Yes, the farms are helping, but now we need people to buy these goods. Instead of just the locals here, we could generate so much money from other people coming in. But they went in debt trying to, you know, execute that plan. That was a great plan, though. If only they had a little bit more money, or if only they could have got funded a little bit more, you know, had some funding help, should I say, from the other provinces or, you know, Canadian government. But yet again, there will be a series of steps for that. And some type of agreements might need to be made, you know. A few things may need to be signed, because yet again, it wouldn't be helping anybody else but Prince Edward Island. Especially since Prince Edward Island's on its own governing system and everything. But then you have two other provinces surrounding it, but they have relationships, they have connections, easy connections with, what did it say, Quebec? Was it Quebec or was it Ottawa? I believe it was Ottawa, not Quebec, forgive me. I believe it was Ottawa. So therefore, you got connections with Ottawa. Prince Edward doesn't, and that would make it really convenient as well. Seems like this province is going up against all the odds right now.
Into debt. At the same time, its economic isolation, caused by its continued separation from the mainland, was becoming increasingly problematic. Trade and transportation between Prince Edward Island and the other provinces were expensive and difficult, and there were concerns about the island's future viability as an independent colony.
Because then you got to go by ships as well then. You got to import and export the cargo on these ships, man. Water's the only way for them to come and get here. It's going to take forever. You know how long it takes for a ship to travel through the water? You know how long it takes? They won't be getting that package that same week. Even delivering the goods by air travel is going to be expensive. Yeah. especially on a little province like this. Oh man, that's why I'm saying the funding. That's where the funding help comes in from the other provinces. That way everybody could do business together, maybe make a little money together, help each other out. Because Prince Edward Island, they need to think of something.
Difficult, and there were concerns about the island's future viability as an independent colony. Facing mounting debt and economic instability, the island's leaders reconsidered their stance on joining the Canadian Confederation. The Canadian government, eager to secure Prince Edward Island's inclusion, offered significant financial incentives to the island in exchange for joining Canada. As part of its confederation, the Canadian federal government would take over all of the island's railway debt, providing much-needed economic relief. And Canada would buy out the island's absentee landlords, resolving one of Prince Edward Island's long-standing political issues. Oh, and of course, one of the most important promises Canada offered Prince Edward Island was that it would be given full provincial status, the same status as its much larger neighbors, despite its relatively small size. In 1873, Prince Edward Island officially joined Canada as its 7th province. But 1873 was a long time ago, and since then, the island has grown with Canada, becoming ever more connected to it by way of rail and road bridges.
Man, forget everything I just said. That's why we should have just hit play. If I would have hit play a little sooner, I would have never even went on that rant and said all that stuff. Guys, why didn't you tell me this? Why didn't you say, Strac, be quiet, just hit play? Okay, and this was a long time ago. Prince Edward Island is, of course, doing swell nowadays. Yeah, they got nothing but support from Canada. I'm glad they figured something out and reached out for that help, because I would have did the same thing as a leader of the province. I would be like, we need help. It ain't coming out of my pockets.
With Canada, becoming ever more connected to it by way of rail and road bridges. And this is on top of an island that is otherwise pretty pleasant to live in terms of
And a bridge is cool. So now they built the long bridge. Now you got truck drivers constantly crossing into Prince Edward Island, delivering goods. Now we could get it from this place to this place to that place to this place. We have a bridge connecting them. So you don't need a boat to get to this island anymore. That makes it easier, to import goods. And it's less time consuming. I mean, come on. You can have a truck make it there in a few hours, cross over the bridge, versus having a huge cargo ship take weeks to deliver it. That's so inconvenient, and it costs a lot of money because of the maintenance. You're thinking about the ship's fuel. You got to think about cargo maintenance. You got to think about this and that and checkpoints. Yes, you got to pay. All those things add up, and that's exactly what you're paying for. Forget that, man. Let's have that truck come over this bridge and bada bing, bada boom.
This is on top of an island that is otherwise pretty pleasant to live in terms of Canadian climates. So why don't more Canadians live there today?
Yeah, I mean, it is small, a little private island.
Prince Edward Island is Canada's smallest province by far in terms of total population. Standing at only 178,000 people, the next largest would be Newfoundland and Labrador with about 510,000 people. This is despite the fact that Newfoundland and Labrador is colder, more rugged, and farther away than Prince Edward Island. But Prince Edward Island had a few things going against it that really inhibited growth in ways that even Newfoundland and Labrador did not.
Okay.
And yes, none of it, Yukon and the Northwest Territories all have smaller populations than Prince Edward Island, but those are still designated as territories of Canada and not full provinces. Of course, one of the prime reasons for Prince Edward Island's small population is its isolation. Located in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, Prince Edward Island is separated from the mainland by the Northumberland Strait. Until the relatively recent construction of the Confederation Bridge in 1997, access to the island was limited to ferries, ships, and planes.
Yep.
This physical separation made large-scale migration and economic integration with mainland Canada challenging. And while Prince Edward Island has always been culturally connected to the rest of the Maritimes, its island status meant that transportation, trade, and communications were slower and more expensive compared to the mainland. But then again, Vancouver Island in the far west and Newfoundland in the far east are both far more isolated and have significantly larger populations. So it can't just be the lack of a bridge, right? Well, in addition to its isolation, Prince Edward Island's economy has historically been based on agriculture, mainly potatoes, along with small-scale industries like shipbuilding and fishing. While these industries were vital to the island's economy, they didn't provide the large-scale employment opportunities needed to support rapid population growth. In contrast, provinces like Ontario and British Columbia benefited from the rise of manufacturing, resource extraction, and urban development, which drew large numbers of immigrants and domestic migrants seeking employment. And of course, the reason why Prince Edward Island didn't diversify its economic base was because it lacked significant natural resources with which it could extract. Other provinces, such as Alberta with its oil industry, or British Columbia with its forests and minerals, saw major industries develop, drawing both workers and investment. Because it was both an island that was hard to reach and lacked any of its own natural resources, this limited industrial development, preventing large urban centers from growing. Now, all that said, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. The island's relatively small population has fostered a strong sense of community. Islanders often describe Prince Edward Island as a place where everyone knows everyone. And this close social fabric has contributed
Didn't I say that? Everybody probably knows everyone, considering how small it is.
to a sense of belonging that's, quite frankly, harder to achieve in more populated areas. This has allowed Prince Edward Island to preserve its identity even as it navigates the pressures of modernization and globalization. Despite everything I just said, Prince Edward Island has been growing considerably in recent years. Since Canada's last official census was taken in 2021, the island has grown by nearly 15% in just 3 years, from 154,000 people to 178,000 people. That's an incredible growth rate. More people have moved to Prince Edward Island in the last 3 years than they did between 1996 and 2021. So clearly, more Canadians are discovering what the islanders have known all along. Prince Edward Island has an attractive landscape, relatively affordable housing, and strong community. The growing tourism industry, helped along by the island's connection to the Anne of Green Gables literary series, and its natural beauty, has also brought attention to the province and created new economic opportunities. Today, Prince Edward Island is still quite small, even if it's growing rapidly. With a population of just 178,000 people, it's by far the smallest of Canada's Maritimes. New Brunswick has about 854,000 people, and Nova Scotia has 1.1 million. And its population would be led by its capital, Charlottetown, with about 39,000 people. This would be followed by Summerside with 15,000 people, Stratford with 9,700, and Cornwall with 5,300 people. All other towns have fewer than 5,000 people living in them. Prince Edward Island is growing at a phenomenal rate. This is partly driven by the incredibly high cost of housing and living in Canada's major cities like Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. In fact, as of April of this year, home prices on the island were down nearly 9% on average. But despite this growth, Prince Edward Island has a long way to go before it can catch up to any of its provincial siblings. Did you love this episode all about Prince Edward Island? Then be sure to check out some of these amazing maps of Canada.
I tell you what, that's some of my Americans right here. You watching this? The ones that, not too good with geography, go ahead and get you one of these maps, man. Help yourself out. I'm not trying to dish you or nothing. We come from the same country. I'm just saying, go ahead and educate yourself on geography, if you're not too familiar with it. Because if I catch you out in public, I'm going to hit you with the questions. We're here with today, sir. Don't get caught up. Don't get caught. And don't you run either, because I'm asking them questions. This video was amazing, and I finally learned about Prince Edward Island. Hearing about it all the time and different people bringing it up and mentioning it real quick, and it just goes over my head. I never really thought about it to dig deep into this, man. Checking out Canada's smallest province. And this was beautiful. This was so educational, and I'm so thankful to be able to come across an amazing video like this, Of course, by my lovely supporters. I've checked out a few videos pertaining to, different topics, different provinces, and they just didn't educate me, to my liking, should I say. And a lot of people agreed and was like, we have different videos towards the same topic for you to check out. You just didn't watch the right video. But today we did, and we were educated. Far more than I expected. Wow. Now educated on Prince Edward Island, I could go ahead and teach this to a whole class if I wanted to. I'm talking about front row center right now. I could teach it to a class. How many of you are actually thinking about transitioning over to Prince Edward Island, considering, the little job opportunities over there? But maybe it's better now. I suppose it's 2025. It has to be better now. If there are better job opportunities over there, better living opportunities where it's more cost efficient. Please let me know in the comments. Do you and your family plan on moving over to Prince Edward Island? Especially if you live in some of the famous popular cities like Toronto and Montreal. Like, why you living over there? It's so expensive. Unless you have a certain job that's based over there. Okay, but other than that, man, Prince Edward Island looks like nothing but peace. You're surrounded by water. You know, surrounded by the people of the town. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody, man. You know, it's a lot of positivity. And I just don't see how Prince Edward Island's economy was able to survive back in those days. Was able to still stay 10 toes and, you know, care for themselves. I'm like, well, they had no choice. People had to work. We got to build these ships. We got to do this. We have to do that. Y'all didn't have help around that time. So just thinking about how left for dead your province was, it's like, wow, everybody was governing themselves. Like, you guys basically made and followed your own rules and had respect because it's a small place. You know, everybody knows everybody. Everybody's aware of what to do and what not to do on this beautiful island. And I think it's really good that more people are actually starting to transition over to Prince Edward Island, considering, you know, you guys are going to boost the economy over there. You are helping it out, purchasing homes, paying taxes, going grocery shopping. You are helping them out, man. Before, I thought that so many people decided not to move over there because either it was underrated or a lot of Canadians had that idea already. You know, they were already educated on the benefits of Prince Edward Island and the things they did, such as like food security, growing a lot of potatoes, you know, harvesting potatoes and doing this and that. This island definitely had its benefits, you know, for all the other provinces of Canada, yes. But what they really needed was that mutual support. They needed somebody to back them up and be on their side as well, help them out because they were just too small to fend for themselves. And it didn't make sense why they were fending for themselves. Just join with Canada. Just join with Canada. You might as well, man. This was great. I enjoyed learning about this topic today. If this was actually your first time being educated on Prince Edward Island and you yourself happen to be Canadian, please feel free to let me know down below in the comment section how this video made you feel. What did you take from this video, and were you able to retain this information so that you could just go on and carry on with this for the rest of your life and be educated on Prince Edward like me? I'm on a journey right now to becoming one of the smartest men on earth, and nobody is stopping me. Ain't nobody gonna stop that, man. Let me know in the comments as well, how informative was this video and how direct was it and how accurate was the information that we were educated on from this video. How accurate was it, man? Please. I usually do my fact checks and everything, but considering that this was highly recommended, I was guessing that you guys already did the fact checking, you know, so I just went ahead and reacted to it, man. Is there any certain information pertaining to Prince Edward Island that you would like to include towards this amazing educational history lesson / geography lesson? Or did this video pretty much sum it all up and, you know, thoroughly explain and educate us on Prince Edward's history? Everyone, feel free to follow my Twitch in the description down below, and feel free to share it to your friends and family members. I think we hit like 62, 63 followers today, and we ain't even go live once yet. It's crazy. Thank you so much for all the support. Please feel free to follow up the Twitch, man, so you guys do not miss out on any of the upcoming live streams. I'm just trying to gather as much people as possible before we start up that first live stream, guys. Trust me, I'm not procrastinating, man. I am not procrastinating. Feel free to follow my Instagram in the description down below as well. Stay safe in your beautiful, amazing country. And I hope to catch you all in the next reaction video.